The employer COVID vaccine rules are changing again, with new guidance issued from the EEOC. That information is next on this Employment Law After Hours news break. The EEOC finally released additional guidance for employers when it comes to implementing vaccine policies in the workplace. Importantly, however, the mask rules have not changed. Therefore, please see the link above now on the screen for our previous video discussing employer rules when it comes to mask mandates for their employees. In addition, various states are also issuing guidance when it comes to vaccine policies in the workplace. We're going to provide you with this information today, but first I'm going to turn it over to Monica.
As you know, Brian and I are both attorneys in Akron, Ohio. However, we're not yet your attorney. So before you rely on anything that you hear in this video, make sure that you read the disclaimer below and reach out to us if you have any questions.
The first part of the guidance that we're going to cover is the fact that the EEOC has clarified that employers can mandate that their employees receive the COVID vaccine. However, there are some exceptions, which I'm going to turn it over to Monica to discuss.
Right. So consistent with what we've previously discussed, private employers are now permitted to continue with any kind of mandatory vaccine policy. However, like we have previously discussed, there are going to be those two exceptions to a vaccine policy. When an employer receives a request for an accommodation, either for religious purposes or for medical disability, the employer has to engage in the reasonable accommodation process under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the EEOC guidance has clarified what that looks like and the requirements that employers are mandated to follow when it comes to specifically medical disabilities. So that undue burden requirement that an employer has to engage in now is first going to ask whether or not the vaccine policy has really anything to do with the safety and security of the workplace. So if you're going to be requiring that your employees receive their vaccination, are they in the workplace? Is it essential to the employee's job function? What's the distancing look like within the workplace? Is this really something that needs to be implemented? That's kind of a step one process for an employer. If you're an employer who has, all of your employees still working at home, that's going to look different than an employer who has employees who are regularly engaging in dialogue in close proximity to one another with clients, customers, whatnot. The second step that you're going to have to look at is when an employee approaches you and asks for an accommodation, medical specifically, is there a way to accommodate this employee without causing an undue burden on the part of the employee or the part of the employer? And really the EEOC's guidance is specific to what's that look like for an employee. So the undue burden standards for the employer have really stayed the same, but for an employee, you really should be taking into consideration a lot more factors than we had previously had under EEOC guidance. So specifically, how many people in your workplace are vaccinated, either fully or partially? Is the employee who's asking for it working around people? Are they remote? Are they engaging with members of the public? And if not, those are things that you should be considering and saying maybe this employee really wouldn't be causing a significant burden on us as a company or an employer if we went ahead and allowed them to forego receiving a vaccine.
And then along those same lines, if you have a situation where an employee is receiving either a disability accommodation or a religious accommodation, as opposed to requiring them to get the vaccine under a direct threat kind of theory that Monica just covered, you could instead, again, accommodate them in the form of allowing them to not get the vaccine and instead continuing to social distance or wear a mask.
Right. So that's really where that undue burden shifts back to the employer to say, or maybe we don't have to stray from our mandatory vaccine policy. However, we could require that you take additional precautions that vaccinated employees don't have to take.
And while we're on the topic of religious accommodations, I think it's important to highlight that we've been receiving a lot of questions about employees who are going online and purchasing essentially these cards that are purportedly signed by some pastor on the internet saying that, hey, this employee has religious beliefs that prevent him from getting the vaccine. It's important for employers to know that if an employee presents with one of those cards, you can dig further into those beliefs, the beliefs of the church, and you can even go as far as to reaching out to that pastor, to clarify, that employee attends that church, and that employee, does hold those religious beliefs. So that is an option that's available to employers if an employee presents with one of those internet purchased cards, or even another note from a local church.
It's also pretty similar to when an employee presents with a medical disability, in that you can require that the employee's primary provider fills out some paperwork, a form, whatnot, to substantiate the employee's disabled condition.
The next area of guidance that was covered by the EEOC and recently published concerns whether employers can require employees to prove that they are vaccinated. Similar with what we've been saying for the last couple of months, employers can require that their employees prove they were vaccinated, such as through their vaccine card or other medical records. However, what has now changed is the EEOC has clarified that those records are considered confidential medical information for those employers, which means that an employer and the HR division or the high-end supervisor that handles employee issues cannot share with others within the workforce who's vaccinated and who is not vaccinated. Therefore, if you're going to develop a policy that says if you do not get the vaccine, you have to continue to wear a mask, it's going to be up to HR or those supervisors to have to enforce that mask policy for those that they know are not vaccinated. They should not be sending out a list to the entire company that's saying, hey, these 10 individuals are vaccinated and these 5 are not. The next guidance that was provided was the EEOC clarifies that employers can require certain job positions to be vaccinated while others are not. Now, again, you're still going to have to go down the reasonable accommodation analysis for religious beliefs or disability. However, an employer can say all the registered nurses have to be vaccinated, but our office and billing staff do not, on the theory that, hey, RNs engage with more members of the public and tend to treat sick patients. So the employer can draw the line as to which job positions have to be vaccinated, again, as long as it's not discriminatory in any way.
And that should also be something that's clarified in a policy. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to be covering today on our news break is the updated guidance on employer incentives for receiving the vaccination.
So essentially, there's 2 types of ways an employee can be required to get the vaccine. They can be required to go to a third-party healthcare provider, CVS, Walgreens, or their physician, or they can be required to get the vaccine through the employer, when the employer actually brings in medical staff to actually give the vaccine. So it's important that we make that distinction. When it comes to incentives, concerning employer voluntary vaccine programs where the employee goes out into the public, gets their own provider to get the vaccine, we now have the guidance from the EEOC that says if you have a voluntary vaccine program and you have your employees go out into the public to get the vaccine, then you're not limited in that incentive. So now shifting over to employer-sponsored optional vaccine programs where the employer actually brings in the medical staff or has the medical employees provide the vaccine on site, the employer can offer incentives in those cases as well. However, they cannot rise to the level of being coercive or otherwise essentially removing the voluntary aspect away from that COVID vaccine. So you'll definitely want to contact your local attorney to see what state limitations also may apply on those incentive programs. While we're on those same lines, for these employer-sponsored vaccine programs, we do want to make sure that we recommend, again, that you talk with your local attorney, because employer-sponsored health programs are very detailed and fact-specific on the analysis that has to be conducted under federal law. Or you can reach out to us if you're in one of the states that we have offices, and we can talk you through that process as well.
Right, and it's important to note that just coming off of the new EEOC guidance, there are a lot of questions that the EEOC didn't address, didn't answer. There's a lot of holes that are still left in a lot of these inquiries. So it's still going to be really important that before you take any steps, you're making sure that you're reaching out to counsel and double checking everything that you're doing, because we're still waiting on additional guidance to come. State laws are varying as well.
So we want to end this news break by providing you with 2 policies that have not changed the recent EEOC guidance. The first is employers can still take temperatures of their employees and ask about symptoms if those employees are coming to the workplace. The second thing that has not changed is at the federal level, at least through the EEOC, mask mandates are still permitted. So employers can still require that their employees wear masks. Again, you can differentiate that based on whether that employee is vaccinated or not, or you can just require that everyone wear a mask. It's really up to the employer. However, I do want to caution listeners that a number of states have proposed, and at least Florida has passed mask limitations for mask mandates. So definitely a talk with your local state attorney on any possible mask mandate limitations that may exist in your state.
All right, and that does it for our breaking news update on employment law after hours.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, click on that like button. If you feel so inclined, go ahead and click on that bell so you're notified next time we upload a video. We'll see you next time.
See ya.